A couple of nights ago, the Republican Party in a primary voted to fire one of the last honest men in Congress. His name was Thomas Massie, an 8-term congressman, a constitutional purist, the guy who actually read the text of every bill he voted on, lost his primary to a Trump-backed Navy SEAL named Ed by 9 points, which is quite a lot to defeat an incumbent by. And before you tell me that this is just politics, that primaries happen, I need you to understand what actually happened here and what this means for the future of the country. First, I want to talk about who Thomas Massie was and is, because I think the media and the Republican Party at large is already trying to memory hole it. Massie wasn't just a Republican who occasionally disagreed with leadership. He was not solely an anti-Trump Republican. He was probably one of the only members of Congress who operated on a coherent, consistent, philosophical principle. The Constitution says what it says, and the government should do what it's authorized to do. Nothing more. He was one of the last congressmen who seemed to actually have a firm belief system which he used to vote on. It did not matter what you paid him, what you attempted to pay him, what the party wanted. He actually had a set core of values that he would vote with. He voted against the Patriot Act extensions. He voted against the surveillance state. He voted against bloated spending bills, regardless of which party wrote them. He opposed foreign aid packages that bypassed congressional debate. He co-sponsored the Epstein Files Transparency Act. He also, and this might have been his last mistake, voted against Trump's big, beautiful bill. Not out of spite, not because he dislikes Trump or what he stands for, because he looked at the national debt trajectory and said, I cannot in good conscience vote to add trillions more. He was doing his job, and for that, he was targeted, destroyed, and now replaced. I want to talk about what this race actually was. This was the most expensive congressional primary in American history. Over $34 million in total spending for a House seat in northern Kentucky, which always votes red. Why? Because this race really wasn't about Ed versus Thomas Massie. Because Ed is honestly a bit of a nothing burger candidate. People who are even pro-Ed per se aren't even really pro-Ed. They're more so just anti-Thomas Massie or pro-Trump. This was much more of a message from the Republican Party and Trump. Cross the White House and we will spend whatever it takes to destroy you. Or you could phrase it this way, cross Israel and the AIPAC lobby and we will destroy you. Trump called Massie, and I'm going to quote him here, the worst Republican congressman in the history of the country, which is an insane thing to say when you look at Congress's long history. Trump called Massie the worst Republican congressman for voting his conscience, for just reading the bills, and for representing his constituents the way the founders actually intended. And I do want to be fair here. Donald Trump is not uniquely responsible for the systematic problem that this race is revealing or showing. The impulse to punish legislators who don't toe the party line predates Trump by a long time. We saw it with Obama-era Democrats. We saw it with Bush-era Republicans. The machinery of party loyalty often crushes individual conscience. This is not a Trump invention by any means. But I think this election showed that there really is no way to stop it. That there really is nothing that an individual congressman can do against the party machinery. Here's what I think a lot of commenters are going to miss about this story. The problem isn't just that Massie lost. The problem isn't what his loss does to everyone who didn't lose. Right now, there are around 435 members of the House of Representatives. And a meaningful number of them, and I'd argue probably most of them, at least on the Republican side, probably privately agree with Massie on at least one significant issue. Maybe it's debt, maybe it's foreign entanglement, maybe it's the surveillance state, maybe it's the concentration of executive power. But they watched what happened to Massie. I think most political junkies were watching that race. They watched the money pour in. They watched the presidential phone calls to their constituents. They watched him lose by 9 points. And in their mind, they made a snap calculation. How do I keep my job? How do I keep my seat? And the calculation that they made is just shut up, vote yes, do what the party bosses want, and you get to keep your seat, your power, your influences, your check, your awesome job where you barely do any work. And this calculation has been made 100 times before. It's been multiplied across hundreds of offices over years and decades. And that leads to how we have a Congress now that has completely abdicated its constitutional role as a co-equal branch of government. And this was all just through, truly, the democratic process. You are allowed to donate to campaigns. You are allowed to donate to races outside of your state. You are allowed to vote for who you want, even if it's not for the best. There was no coup, there was no crisis that led to the state that the American Congress is currently in. James Madison didn't design a system where the executive branch picks the legislator. He designed a system where the legislature checks the executive. What we are watching right now and in the past 50-odd years is that design is being dismantled. Not by force, not through a coup, but through the primary system itself. According to the Bipartisan Policy Center, nearly 80% of eligible voters do not participate in a primary. Most people will come out to vote for the presidential. A lot of them skip the midterms for some reason. But every 4 years, the majority of voters will come out. But the primaries are much more important than the actual general election. Except in a scarce few seats across the countries, you already know who's going to win the seat just on how the district is drawn. It's either a red district or a blue district. And when people don't participate in the primaries, they are really only left with one option. Whoever got enough of the 20% of people who come out in the primaries to vote for them. That's all you need to win the majority of seats in Congress. Now, I do want to talk about what this loss means for economic freedom in America. Everyone who watches this channel, I would imagine, is probably libertarian leaning, maybe right of center. You are probably a supporter of the free markets. Thomas Massie was one of the most reliable votes for economic freedom in Congress. He opposed the corporate welfare buried in emergency legislation. He opposed the regulatory expansion that gets slipped into these must-pass bills. He opposed deficit spending that robs future Americans of their prosperity before they've even been born. The argument for Ed Gallant replacing Massie is that you need someone who will deliver for Trump's agenda. And that is fine. I can see why people are swayed by that message. They want Trump to pass the SAVE Act. They want the big, beautiful bill to pass. They want everything that Trump campaigned on. And that is fine. But I really want you to ask yourself, and the people who voted for Ed, which agenda items that Trump has been able to pass actually benefit you, the taxpayer, the small business owner, the family trying to build something, and which ones are benefiting the connected, the donors, the defense contractors, the lobbying class. Massie was one of the only people in Congress who would read a bill and then actually ask, who is this benefiting and what does it actually do? And I think that having somebody in Congress like that, even if you don't agree with them, is a benefit to the political process. And the people who are celebrating his loss most likely don't even live in Kentucky's 4th District. But unfortunately, money is here to stay in the political process in America. Now, I'm not here to eulogize the Republican Party. I still consider myself a Republican. I am a member of the party. I am on leadership in certain county level positions within the party myself. But I do think that the Republican Party is at a crossroads. And I think this primary and the primaries we've been seeing is a bit of a sign for which direction the party is currently heading. Over 95% of Trump-endorsed primary contenders won their seats. Trump is still a massive force driving the Republican Party turnout and policy. I think there are two visions of what the GOP can be. And I know I have heard Vivek talk about this on the Dave Smith podcast when he was on, back when he was running for president. I think one vision is going to be a populist vehicle. It's going to be more loyal to the leader or the party. It's more organized around personality. It's held together by cultural grievance and sort of executive energy from the top. It can win elections. Populism is a very powerful vehicle to actually win elections. As we've seen, I mean, Trump won 2 times, maybe 3 times if you think that. I won't discount you. But I don't think that populism can govern constitutionally or effectively because it has no limiting principles. It doesn't have a coherent ideological force behind it to actually move the ball and transition into a governing mindset. The other vision for the party is a constitutional vision: limited government, physical responsibility, individual liberty, legislative independence. This, quite honestly, on a large scale, is very hard to sell. Really, the last time you can argue that a libertarian won the Republican primary for president was probably 1964 with Barry Goldwater. You can maybe argue a few of the other candidates the Republicans have put up have been libertarian-ish, but Barry Goldwater is probably the closest thing we can get to a real libertarian winning the primary. And he lost terribly. So I do think that the libertarian path to the White House of the Republican Party is not very attainable. But it is possible, and if the party pivots that way, it would be a lot easier. Thomas Massie represented the second vision of a more limited government, physical responsibility, individual liberty, Republican Party. But that first vision, that populist vision, won out. Thomas Massie often has a quote that he said, "I thought that Republican voters were voting for libertarian Republicans when they were voting for Ron Paul in the primary, when they voted for Thomas Massie, when they voted for Rand. But then when they voted for Trump, he saw that they were just voting for the craziest people, and Trump has outdone everyone on that. I think people nowadays do not care what change looks like, but they need change, and they think that the status quo has to be completely reinvented." And maybe they're right, but I do not want a populist reckoning to happen in this country. I don't think that libertarian Republicans are dead. Rand Paul is obviously still serving, and he's talking about running in 2028. Even at Thomas Massie's consolation speech, he was being chanted at by the crowd to run in 2028. I don't think that libertarian Republicans are dead after this. They are still a somewhat sizable faction of the party. But it definitely does give them a warning not to step out of line while Trump is still in office. Thomas Massie has lost his primary. He's going to be fine. He has a farm. He has a family. And I think more importantly, as an ex-congressman, he has a record that he can actually be proud of. I think the question is whether the ideas he stood for can survive his departure from Congress. I think that's really going to depend on people like you and me, people who actually care about constitutional government and economic freedom. We have to keep making the case. We have to keep demanding more from our representatives and keep refusing to accept the premise that loyalty to a party or a person is the same thing as loyalty to the republic. It's not. The founders built a system to survive men who confuse their interest with national interest. But that system really only works if the people inside it and the people watching the people inside it understand the difference. If this video resonated with you, please subscribe. I like to cover economic freedom, constitutional government, and ideas that can actually move the country forward. Please subscribe. Please stick around. And if you are American-based, I really do encourage you to look into joining Americans for Prosperity. They are an organization that I work for that does a lot of great stuff around the country, actually promoting and pushing for economic freedom.